Hey, everybody out there in podcast land. Welcome to the very first episode of Different Strings. This is a brand new guitar adjacent podcast hosted by two people you never heard of. My name's Wes, and your name is?
I am Andrew.
Wes and Andrew bringing to you Different Strings. Andrew is the tech behind all of the things that go on. He's making sure it all gets done from a technical standpoint. So, Andrew, why don't you tell us about the social stuff that you've set up so people can talk to us?
Absolutely. So you can reach us on Twitter at Diff Strings Pod. I know. You can reach us on YouTube at Different Strings Podcast, and on Facebook, just search for Different Strings Podcast and you'll find it. And Instagram is coming.
Yeah, and I want to encourage everybody to ask questions, leave comments, be polite, and especially give us ideas about topics that you think we'll enjoy talking about and that you'll enjoy listening to, because we've got some ideas. We've probably got more ideas than we could really use, to be perfectly honest, in a reasonable amount of time. But we want to be responsive, and we want to hear what you want to hear about, so that we can do a little bit of research and form some opinions and gain some knowledge. Because at its core, I feel like this podcast is all about learning more about what's out there in the guitar and bass guitar and guitar related products world. There's a lot of variety out there, and stringed instruments are not just electric guitars, although that's kind of our focus. So we want to hear what you want to talk about, and we'll talk about those things as best as we can. That sound about right to you, Andrew?
Yeah, just definitely engage with us. Twitter and YouTube are great places. And also, if you want to email us, you can email us at differentstringspodcast@gmail.com. Like Wes said, send us your questions, your suggestions, your feedback. Just engage with us and let us know what you think. And, we'll adjust as we go. We want to make this as, as entertaining and informational as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I think I want you to share with folks, because this was your idea, 100%. You brought this to me, and I thought it was a great idea, and I jumped right in. Why did you want to start up what is effectively another guitar podcast?
Exactly. So, all right. So at its core, I want to give back, right? So I've been playing guitar, I don't know, 7-8 million years. And, you learn a lot, you make a lot of mistakes, you do things that work, you do things that don't work. And, we live in an age where information is shared in a nanosecond and decisions are made in a heartbeat. And I see a lot of chatter on the interwebs, and I always feel like I want to engage, but I want to do it in a thoughtful and meaningful way. And really, the only thing I have to offer to listeners and fans of the podcast is information and experience. And when I say experience, I mean my experiences. What have I seen that's worked? What hasn't worked? What are my thoughts on different things? But at the same time, I'm here to learn as well. I picked you as a co-host because you and I are very different musically. We're both guitar players, but we like very different things. We approach guitar very different ways. You listen to bands I don't, and vice versa. And I want to learn, and I also want to learn from people that are engaging with us. Share with me if you hear something I say that's not not in line with what you think or believe. Let me know. Like, talk to me, and I'm willing to learn and pick up new information. So I wanted to do this to give back to the community that has been so amazing and rewarding, and that I've devoted my life to. But I also want to learn. So that's really, in a nutshell, why I want to do this.
I really love that idea, and I'm a fairly experienced podcaster. I do motorcycle podcasts, and I love learning and finding out new things about these industries and these experiences. And that's why I jumped right on board, is because this gives me an excuse to deep dive into things that I don't think about. I just hook up the pedals and plug in the amps and change the strings. And I want to think more critically about those things, and talk to somebody about them who doesn't think that I'm a nut job for being this interested in
Mm.
this tiny little slice of things.
Mhm.
So, well, I'll let that serve as our introduction, and as people will find out over the course of the next several episodes, we're going to divide the bulk of the episode up into like a 3-course meal. We're going to have a little appetizer. We're going to have a main course where we get to the topic of our episode, and then we're going to have a little dessert, and you'll find out what those things are as we go along. Now, the topic of this first episode is amplifiers, tubes, solid state, digital, how all those things affect us, what they're about. And before we get into that, and we're going to segue into that pretty easily. That's a musical term, by the way, segue.
Nice.
I just want you to be impressed with how easily I worked that in. So I'm going to ask you like a little background question, and we're going to ask you 2 questions today, and you can ask
Okay.
me the same questions, or you can just ramble on all you want. So the first question I want to ask you, because I'm genuinely curious, is when did you start playing guitar, and why did you want to pick it up?
Okay. So the first guitar I ever owned was a gift from my aunt, who I'm still in contact with today. And she bought me an acoustic guitar. I can't remember if it was a birthday gift or another type of gift, but it was my first ever guitar. Now,
Was
the
it
thing,
nylon or steel string?
steel string, and I was very young. I don't even remember how old I was. I mean, I'm thinking like 10, 9, or 8. I mean, definitely very young. And I could barely play it.
Yeah,
And because it was an acoustic guitar, steel string, I had tiny, little baby hands, and it was very difficult for me. But I loved the the I just loved thinking about I may be able to make music with this someday when I'm older. So it kind
yeah.
of sat in the closet, not played, which is kind of sad. Um, but then when I was 12 years old, there was you may remember these. They were Sam Goody.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Sam Goody, were you? Okay. Sam Goody was a record store. And kids, records are these vinyl discs now. So there was
They're
a record
big.
store.
They have a hole in the middle.
They spun around with it. Um, so there was a Sam Goody had a little display in the front of the store with an electric guitar and a tiny little amplifier. And I mean
Tiny.
tiny little. Okay. That was an Ibanez Roadstar. It was I it became mine. My mother bought me this thing. I begged, I pleaded. Black, shiny, had a tremolo, 22 frets. I mean, it was a legit Ibanez from back in
Yeah.
the day. It wasn't like, it wasn't cheap. It was an Ibanez. And I might have been 12, so that we're talking like 82.
Okay.
Um, and that was my first electric, and I had that for a really long time, long enough that it got me through my first bands, plural. um I played my first shows with that. I learned my first rock songs, covers. I wrote my first songs on it. They were terrible, but I wrote my first songs up. But that was, so I would say really 12 is when it kicked in for me. What about you? Oh,
Um,
and
uh,
you asked me why.
yeah, I did. And you
Why?
glossed right over it. No.
I did. Why did I start playing? I mean, guitar. It was and you'll hear by the time we finish the episode, like by the time I was 12, I was firmly entrenched in the rock music of the day.
Yeah.
Van Halen, AC/DC, stuff like Ozzy. Um, I was I was flabbergasted at the sounds that Alex Lifeson was making on moving pictures. I mean, it was just mind-boggling,
Yeah.
the sound that these guitars made. And I'm not saying I didn't appreciate the rest of the bands. Like, I appreciated especially drums, always really had a fascination with rhythm. Um, but there was something about guitar. I mean, it was hot, it was sexy, it was flashy, it was just amazing. And I wanted to make those sounds. I wanted to be that person that was making those sounds. And I know I didn't sound like that with that Ibanez and that little amplifier, but I sure for like a minute or two, I sure felt like that person. And it was a dream become reality. It was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't pick it up until my teenage years. I'm a military brat, and we lived overseas until I was from when I was 7 until I was 15. And the summer I turned 15, we moved back to the States,
Mhm.
and I didn't know anybody. And it was like another month and a half before school was starting. And my mother had subjected me to years of piano lessons, and I just didn't feel like playing the piano. I didn't think that was cool. Now, of course, I'm absolutely grateful she forced me to do that
Yeah.
because, it gave me a musical background that I couldn't get anywhere else.
Yep.
But I came up with the idea of getting a guitar, and my parents were, no, we're not buying you a guitar. And this is back in the days of newspapers. We got the newspaper every day. This is pre-internet,
Kids,
probably.
newspapers are
This is probably 1984.
Mhm.
Yeah. So just a couple years after you. So I'm a little older than you. So in the paper was an ad for a store called Music and Arts. It's a regional chain in Virginia, DC, Maryland.
Mhm.
And this specific ad said, rent a guitar, rent a clarinet, rent a this, rent a that.
Really?
Yeah. And so I asked my parents if I could rent a guitar. And it was, I don't know what it ended up being. It was $10 a month or $15 a month or something like that. It was pretty reasonable. And they thought that they could go into that because they figured I would get tired of it and then they could just take the guitar back. So that guitar was an Aria Pro 2
I
super
remember them.
strat, and it was way more guitar than I needed to start playing on it. Had double locking trem, all this kind of
Whoa.
stuff. Yeah, and I didn't know how to. I had to keep taking it back. I had to get my dad to take me back over there to when it would go too far out of
Tune it.
tune that the fine tuners wouldn't work. Um, and I just kind of hacked away at it, and I learned, I don't know, 8 or 10 cowboy chords. And I enjoyed sitting around strumming the guitar, but it wasn't until I connected with a kid that lived, down around the corner, across the way. And he was already a pretty good guitar player. Dude's name is Eric. And he knew some chords that I didn't. He knew B7, which I did not know. And I knew a couple of chords that he didn't. And so we basically just decided to start a band.
Nice.
It's like we combined our chords. We sat down in his family room in his basement and just started playing together, and that turned into a band. I eventually returned the rental, bought my own guitar. My first electric guitar was a Bradley Flying V in Robin's Egg Blue. Bradley was the house brand of a company called Venom in Music, which was a Virginia and Maryland store that later got swallowed up by Guitar Center. And I got that for $50 plus $25 for the case. And we got going. And I would love to have like a deep, I connected with music, and that's why I started, but I thought it would be a great way to get girls to talk to me.
Well, then I have the perfect story for you because when I was 15, my first like real, no, 14, my first real band, um, the young girl from the neighborhood who happened to sing background vocals for us is sitting 20 feet away in the living room as we've been married for 25 years. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't get girls with the band. Okay. I got the, I got the girl
Nice.
and I latched onto her and never let go.
Never let go.
She's still, but seriously, I mean, I did meet, um, not only did I meet my future wife through music, but friends, including yourself, who, I mean, I met you through a internet forum
Birds
20
and
years
Moons.
ago.
Yeah.
20
Which
years
isn't even
ago.
around anymore.
No. And we physically met at the Paul Reed Smith event, and I've been to your house, and you've come to this area. I've met people, I've developed friendships with people priceless. I never, the side benefit of music in my life has been really the real benefit, which is developing the friendships and relationships with people that I wouldn't have
Absolutely.
without it. So, no, but girls especially, number one. Don't let
Yeah.
anyone tell you it's not the reason. It is the reason. It's the reason we all do this.
Yeah. And I now I have to wonder, and I'm gonna find some female players and ask them why you started playing, because
Is it
well,
to
and
get
maybe
guys?
some of them, yeah, maybe some of them got into it for girls too. And maybe some of them got into it because they thought guys would think it was cool. I'm just
Exactly.
curious about that. So here, let me ask you one more easy question, possibly quick. What's the newest pedal that you have, and why did you get it?
Mm. So confession time, Wes. I'm a
Pedal
little
whore.
I'm a little embarrassed to say this. No, well, I have several confessions, but here's one that may surprise you. I don't know, it may not. Um, I have never owned a fuzz pedal
Never.
ever. I have never owned a fuzz pedal.
Okay.
Um, and I I never realized how amazing they are until I finally caved in and bought one. And I got a JHS Bender, and it's appropriately named because after I bought it, I went on a bender and bought like three more fuzz pedals. But the JHS Bender is the newest pedal in the arsenal, and this is not an advertisement for JHS, and JHS doesn't sponsor us. And I may have a man crush on Josh Scott, but that's
100%.
yeah, but that's besides the point. Um, I never realized how much fun playing a fuzz pedal can be. Um, and I could probably do an hour long episode on a fuzz pedal alone now that the relationship has started. But um, the here's the amazing thing about it: so many tones that I hear on records, I never realize how
Come from a
many of
fuzz
them,
pedal.
not overdrive, not amp distortion, fuzz. Now that I'm playing one, it's like, oh,
Oh,
that's where
yeah.
Jimi Hendrix slash Jimmy Page slash Jeff Beck slash name 74,000 other guitar players. That's where that tone was coming from. It wasn't an overdrive pedal. It wasn't the amp. It was glorious fuzz.
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm too old. I'm very embarrassed to admit that I've never, like, I'm ashamed of myself. I mean, I may climb under my desk for the rest of this episode in shame that I've never. So it's like, it's very addicting. And if you've clearly, you're not a fuzz virgin, I guess I should say.
Well, I'll admit to you today, Andrew, that I've also this year bought my very first ever fuzz pedal.
Shut up.
Yep, I got a Jupiter Effects Warlow, and it's a big, like hammered aluminum steel casing. I mean, the thing is huge.
Right. Like Soviet era tank metal.
Yeah, exactly. And I never had a fuzz pedal before. I always
That's
had,
crazy.
distortions and overdrives. Yeah, it's my first one.
What have
And
we been missing?
it's so cool to play with. I love kicking it on to just kind of take whatever sound is going on and just really kind of pushing it right through the mix. And I'm looking forward to using it with a recording project I've got going on that we'll learn about as we go in the next few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So that's the newest pedal you got? Oh, and you had, I'm sorry, I keep glossing over the second part of these questions. Why did I get it?
well, because
I'm like,
fuzz, you
yeah,
wanted a
because
fuzz pedal.
yeah, I wanted one. Why did I get it? Because honestly, it was because I have been um, binging a lot of JHS videos. I find them very entertaining.
Yeah.
I think I love the history part. I love learning about the history of pedals. It's just a new thing I started watching, and when I watched his history of fuzz, it just got me thinking, like, wow, like it's maybe fuzz is not all bad. Like I
Yeah.
mean, I definitely grew up. Look, the Van Halen era, a lot of hot Marshalls cranked up to
Oh
11,
yeah.
and the Variac, and there's no fuzz to be found. And I get it. Like that was the '80s. There was no fuzz. But as I mature and as my tastes change, and as musical tastes change, I mean, there's so much fuzz in modern music right now. Shoegaze is coming back.
As it
Um,
should.
Thank
Great
you.
genre.
Exactly. And music from the '90s is starting to like make a resurgence. Like people are still listening to Smashing Pumpkins.
Which
Lots of
baffles me.
and lots of fuzz.
Yeah, yeah,
Kurt Cobain, there, Nirvana, lots of fuzz. Like
yeah.
I just from watching his videos and from hearing demos and from just like I just once in my life I'm going to experience that, and I'm really glad I did. So now I have a few more coming. And there was like another reason because I'm starting to do some covers for a local project, and I want to do some. I think Dave Gilmour stuff they want, and I've always struggled to get Dave Gilmour type tones. I call him Dave because we're friends.
Yeah.
I always struggle to get like really good, David Gilmour tones, but my understanding is Dallas Arbiter Fuzzface or Ram's Head. So
There you
I'm
go.
experimenting to try to get like more authentic. If we're going to play a cover, you might as well play the cover, right?
Right. Yeah, my newest pedal is a J Rocket Boing, and I'll go ahead and guess what it does.
Spring reverb.
You got it, spring reverb.
And does it drip, my friend? Does it drip?
It almost drips.
Okay.
It almost drips. It gets what it does is it gets close enough for a pedal that I'm very happy with it. And I got it for I wanted to put together a travel rig that I can use for rehearsals
Okay.
and small gigs. And I recently got an amp that I mounted directly on my pedal board. It's a very small amp. It's a Vox MV50 Brian May, because I had to get
Brian
one of
May.
those.
Right.
And so I wanted to have a reverb pedal because there's no reverb in the amp, and I like to have a little bit of reverb. And I thought if I'm going to get one, I'm going to get one that is a spring reverb emulation, and maybe hopefully has a little bit of drip to it. So yeah. And did you buy your fuzz new, your JHS fuzz?
No, I
Yeah, neither
didn't.
did I. I got mine used right on
Yeah,
reverb.
I used to really be like, I have, first of all, it has to be new. I have to have the box. I have to, these pedals are meant to be played. I'm not a collector. I don't need the box. I don't care if it's got chips and crack like that. I want to save money. And if
Yeah.
you're buying a lot of them, you might as well, get it, save some money where you can. So no, no. This one actually got locally from Facebook Marketplace. I'm not being paid by Facebook to say that. Um, and and I've actually I've got a couple of pedals. A lot of my pedals right now are used because I want a lot of them and I don't want to spend a lot of money. So
Yeah, that's good. All right, that's going to wrap up our appetizer as we segue. There's my music term again into our main course, which is talking about amps. And I wanted to introduce this by talking about two pieces of news that we both recently encountered, which kind of, I think, clarify or crystallizes the entire topic that we're going to talk about.
yeah.
So, you know who Tosin Abasi is, and if I mean, you and I know who he is, and if you listener don't know who Tosin Abasi is, he is one of the musicians in a amazing progressive instrumental band called Animals as Leaders, which is, I think, a weird and brilliant name. And he has been a digital amp user for most of his career. He's an Axe-FX user, and he recently switched away from his Axe-FX, and he is now using Bad Cat tube amplifiers. And they're designing a special one just for him. I think it's got some it's a high gain amp. It runs on EL34s, so it's going to be kind of a hot rod Marshall, direction. And he talks about the clarity and definition. And when I read that, I was kind of like, well, Tosin, because we're buddies, so I call him Tosin. Um, duh. I mean, that's the whole point of a tube amp is clarity and definition. Now, on the flip side of that, one of my legit guitar heroes, somebody that I have been listening to and copping his licks and trying to capture his tone since probably 1983-ish, the very first time I heard the Iron Maiden Piece of Mind album, is Dave Murray. And Dave Murray has been a tube amp user his entire career. And when he went to rack units for ease of transportation, he started using the Marshall JMP1 and Marshall power amps to kind of continue that Marshall sound. And he's now using the Axe-FX instead of his JMP1. But the funny thing about it is they just put it on the JMP1 setting and don't mess around with it. And they just run that setting straight to front of house.
Sounds like Dave Murray.
And it sounds like Dave Murray, who I would argue, you know, you plug Dave Murray into Tosin Abasi's Bad Cats, he's going to sound like Dave Murray, and vice versa.
Exactly.
But I thought this was just a really great way to start looking at the debate and the discussion over amps and why we choose what we use. Because, you know, if you're looking for clarity and definition and those kinds of things, and that classic moving air experience, it's hard to beat a tube amp. But if you're looking for consistency and ease of use, once you understand how to program them, quick transportation, quick setup, and consistency. I mean, Dave Murray needs to sound like Iron Maiden everywhere he goes. And you just, you know, you plug it in, you plug your guitar in the front, and your sound comes out of it every single time. And I would say, you know, he's probably underutilizing the JMP1 setting on his Axe effects, but that's kind of the way it goes. And I think these two guys, these two players who are monster players, one of them abandoning digital and going tube, and the other abandoning tube and going digital for live purposes, at least.
Live purposes, right?
Is just, it makes me laugh because, you know, it feels like, it feels like something that would happen to me and one of my friends. Although, well, you know,
and I think, first of all, the timing of these news articles is hysterical, because as we're doing the notes in our research for this episode, which we jokingly called, you know, in a clickbaity way, the death of tube amps. Because there is no shortage, by the way, of YouTube content that's clickbaity and, like, you
absolutely,
know, and triggering, like, tube amps are dead, and or digital sucks, you know. And we vowed not to do that with this one, right?
Yes.
We're not going to. I think it's very clear. These two articles make it very clear that there is still a place for both, for all gear. There's a place for all gear. They all have their strengths, and they also all have their drawbacks. Yeah. And every player is different. And by the way, Tosin's played tube amps in the past. He's had Morgans, he's had other amps in the past before he had, you know, an Axe Effects, and he just has been an Axe Effects user for a very long time because, yeah, it's easy and they sound good. So him trying out a new set of Bad Cats and going, holy crap, these sound amazing. Yeah, they do.
Yeah, of course they do.
Of course they do. And but correct me if I'm wrong, Bad Cats Matchless creator, right? It was the same guy. He moved on from Matchless to do Bad Cat. I think that is correct. I wouldn't swear to it, but that sounds right. Not a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. Bad Cats are the bee's knees, the cat's pajamas, right? Okay, now Dave Murray, who has been playing Marshalls since longer than most people that are listening to this have been alive, maybe, had enough. Tubes blowing, they're getting expensive. Teardown is a nightmare. Get me an Axe Effects, put it on the Dave Murray setting. I mean, of course it makes sense, and there's room for both of these things. Oh, incidentally, my first concert was Power's Peace of Mind, 1983.
Was it really? I'm so jealous.
I fell in love with them right when you did.
I didn't get to see Iron Maiden live until it was the last round of the Power Slave tour.
Oh, good album too.
Yeah, I loved that album, and I've seen them more than any other band except for King's X. King's X I have seen more times than any band, and Iron Maiden is number 2. I think I've seen Iron Maiden 10 times. Wow. And if they're playing near me, I'll try to go. Going. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's, like I said, the timing of these articles was kismet. We were doing this and we're like, nothing crystallizes our point. It's a microcosm of this whole discussion, which is everything has its place. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So yeah, and we're not trying to set out either or. We're going to talk about pros and cons of all the different platforms. But let's get this out there right now. I am a diehard tube amp user. They're my favorites. From where I'm sitting right now, I can point at 4 tube amps at least. I've got a PV Classic 50. I've got a Coke twin tone. I've got a Tone King Falcon Grande. I've got a Supro Thunderbolt 2. That's 4. Was that 4?
That was 4. Also,
Yeah.
humble hashtag humble brag. What's up over there? You can only
Uh,
play one at a time, Wes. What's
but they all sound different.
Oh, I know. That's what you tell your wife, right? They all sound
uh,
different.
yeah, well, I've had that Classic 50 since 2002.
But that Coke is actually getting up there because I remember when you got that.
Yeah, that was probably 2008 or 9. I wanted a higher gain amp, and that nailed it. And then, but I also have a Line 6 duotone, which is fully. It's not just digital; it's a modeling amp. You
Mhm.
know, I have that Vox MV50, which is going to start getting some more use. And they say that has a tube in it, but it's not a traditional tube. That thing doesn't get hot, and it's not big enough to put a 12AX7 in it. So
It's just for lighting, is that?
yeah, it might be a tiny little blue light bulb or something. And I've got an old Fender M80, which is absolutely a solid state
Wow.
amp.
Yep.
Yeah, and I got that 100% for the chorus channel. I got it for $100 used, and it worked. So I got that just for the clean chorus channel, and I use it every now and then on a recording. And that's where I'm coming from. I love tube amps. You can have I have a stash, I have a box of tubes that I've been collecting for the last 25 years. And you can have them when you prime from my Cold Dead Fingers, that kind of thing. But
Well,
I don't
I got
hate digital.
I have I another confession.
I know what you're going to say.
Um, so I am a diehard tube amp fanatic as well. However, I hurt my back a few years ago and downsized all of them in favor of, well, first it was some Line 6 stuff, and that wasn't floating my boat, and then eventually landed on a Kemper Profiler.
Oh, nice.
And the Kemper Profiler has been a staple of my recording rig and my live rig for close to 10 years. Um, and it wasn't until I know people are probably looking behind me going, I see some Friedmans back there. So just, I don't know, like within the last couple of months, I started realizing that while the Kemper has its strengths, and we're going to get to all these things, I kind of miss playing an amp.
Yeah,
Sorry, that's, I know that people say, well, there's no difference. There's a difference.
there is a difference.
There's a
Absolutely.
difference. It's just, there's a different, I don't know what it is. It just takes a shorter amount of time for the electrons to make their path through the cable. That all the path that it has to take to get to the speaker is faster. The
Yeah.
responsive, it's just something. It's not magic. It is science. It is real, but it is definitely it's definitely tangible.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
missed it.
I think it's important to note that, you look at somebody like Tosin Abasi, you look at somebody like Dave Murray. These are players with established careers, recording, live work, guest spots, all that stuff. And they are still chasing tone. They're still chasing tone. And I think we all do that from the very moment we pick up an electric guitar. And that's why I have a bunch of different amps, is because I'm still chasing tone as my musical tastes and what I'm doing with my various bands and projects change over the years. It's often easier to just get an amp that does that instead of trying to make my existing amp sort of do that,
Right.
and I've recently switched to combos for the majority of my live work because I didn't injure my back, but I got tired of humping giant speaker cabinets. you know
And when you're playing small rooms, what is the point?
yeah. So having going back to a 112 was a little bit of a revelation for me. And I also wanted to get something because, like, my Classic 50, which is a workhorse amp and I use it a ton, it has 27 knobs on the front of it and I think 2 on the back. My Falcon Grande, this Tone King amp I got, it has volume, tone, mix, and dwell. That's it. It literally has 4 knobs and a on the 4 big knobs on the front. It has a voicing switch, which looks like a chicken head knob, but that's a switch, not a knob. And then on the back, it has a built-in attenuator switch, which again, switch, not a knob, different thing. But it has 4 knobs on it.
See,
And
and I love the simplicity of that.
yeah, there's nothing like it.
No, I was another I'll drop another name, Dave Friedman, who we don't get paid by Dave Friedman, and I'm not an endorser. We listen to Dave Friedman's Tone Talk, or listen to any interviews he does. Simplicity, the simpler the circuit, the more pure. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just it's a palpable, tangible asset to these circuits. It brings just a pureness that I sure if you're playing really, 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 really high gain, you probably don't feel a difference in touch sensitivity and responsiveness. It's just getting lost in all that compression. And I understand that makes sense. But if you're, I don't know, playing through a fuzz pedal for the first time in my life, touch sensitivity matters, responsiveness matters. And I've played fuzz pedal emulations, digital emulations. It is not the same. It's just not the same. You can't, it's good. It sounds good, but it's not giving you that feedback, that immediate feedback that alters how you play. I'm sorry, we can go on forever, but that's
we could.
Two boomers talking tube amp surprise. All right. So
well, you did a little bit of research into this, which I appreciated. So tell me what you found out about tube amps, and were you surprised by anything that you learned?
I was actually. So if you ask anyone who's sort of familiar with the history of tube amps, who designed the first tube amp, who built the first tube amp?
Oh, it was absolutely Leo Fender. Leo Fender invented electricity, and then the next day he made the bassman.
Exactly. Bingo, right. So I believed that, because the 59 bassman is as close to perfection as you can get in an amplifier. It sounds great cranked. It's a great pedal platform. It weighs about as much as a Soviet era tank, and they're still out there because they last forever. But I was surprised to find out that, as a matter of fact, he did not design the first tube amp.
What?
I'm sorry. Facts don't care about your feelings, Wes.
That's right.
No, apparently, and this is true, I guess, about any invention, so to speak. I mean, he evolved the design from PA amplifiers. So, and back in the day, PA amplifiers were tubes, which makes sense. That's what was available at the time. And he just changed the circuit somewhat to better fit guitar players. But as a matter of fact, it wasn't even the first. PAs weren't even the first tube amps. I went back further and discovered that there were some early tube amplifiers. The earliest tube amplifier was around the 30s, designed by someone by the name of George Beauchamp, and they were actually designed for dobros.
Huh.
News to me.
I didn't even know you could plug in a dobro.
No, I did not know that either. I imagine that sounded interesting. So Leo Fender evolved the design and created the first wonder of the world, the 59 bassman, and they sold like hotcakes. And someone by the name, you may know this guy, his name is Jim Marshall. You heard of Jim Marshall?
I have heard of Jim Marshall.
British guy, great guy. He was a salesman in the UK, and he was importing bassmans to the UK. And someone said, "Hey, Jim, these things are heavy and expensive. We could build them here."
Yeah, I imagine it was really expensive to import, especially, so we're talking late 50s, early 1960s. England was still recovering economically from World War II at that point.
Correct. Yep.
So importing things from the United States would have been hugely expensive.
Yep. And I believe there was a problem with voltage too, right? Because, right? Okay. So they decided to start building 59 bassman clones. Now, of course, they weren't clones because they don't look the same. In fact, what Jim did is he flipped them upside down and called it the JTM 45. So the first Marshall was really just a 59 bassman flipped upside down and put in a different package.
Yeah, and they, no doubt, they would have had access to different parts. I mean, sure, it's got an output transformer and a choke and capacitors and resistors and tubes, but they would have had in England, they would have had access to different variations of those,
Well,
than
right.
Fender would have been using on the West Coast of the United States.
Absolutely. And, I didn't realize it until doing this research, but transformers matter. They
Oh,
affect tone
yeah, they do.
a lot. And so the different transformers had an effect on the tone. And what if you play a 62, or if you get an opportunity to play an old JTM, it's going to feel a lot different than a 59 basement. It's going to sound a lot different than a 59 basement. So even though they were basically replicating the circuit, they were doing it with the materials they had on hand, and it made for a very different amplifier.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to throw in something that I may not have ever told you, but when Jim Marshall passed away, not terribly long ago, I don't remember exactly when, but one of my friends, I had posted an article about it on social media, and one of my friends commented that if ever somebody's passing did not warrant a moment of silence, it was Jim Marshall. And
I love
I
that.
got what he was talking about, and that cracked me up.
Um, so, and again, story time, right? Because we want this to be personal. Many, many years ago, I was on South Street in Philadelphia, and I was with my girlfriend, and we walked into a local mom and pop, and there was a really, really tattered and destroyed and beat up 1972 Marshall Super Lead 100
uh,
watt head,
no
and
match for volume.
yeah, it was awful, and it just looked terrible. It did turn on, and noise came out of it, but it wasn't good noise. And but it was still for sale, and it was $500. Now I'm talking like early '90s. Um, I knew nothing about this at the time. I wasn't a tube amp aficionado. I just knew tube amps good. I called a friend who said, "You absolutely need to find a way to buy that amplifier." And I said, "I don't know if I have the money." And he said, "Hold on, I'm going to make a phone call." And he said, "I'm going to give this guy your number." This guy calls me, Aspen Pittman, from Groove Tubes, and he says to me, "What are they asking for the amplifier?" I said, 500. He said, "How bad is it?" I said, "It makes noise." He said, "Buy it." I said, "I don't have,
I don't have
um,
$500.
yeah, it's either buy this amplifier or eat." And he said, "What do you want to do? Eat or sound good?"
So you bought the amp.
I did. Um,
Absolutely.
And then that friend of mine that made that phone call. No, I didn't actually speak to Aspen Pittman. He talked to my friend, but because I don't roll in those circles. But he did. He did say, "Does your friend want to eat or sound good?" And that friend restored that amplifier over the course of several years. I mean, it had been drilled for a fan.
Oh,
um yeah, it was just destroyed. Can I tell you how loud it was when it was done? It was rated at 100 watts, but it was pushing 120,
oh
130,
man. Yeah,
because
no
the
doubt.
original transformers were still good, and they were really powerful. That was a great amplifier.
Yeah. And did you ever have the opportunity to turn it up very far?
No, never. No, because it would have destroyed everything within a 4 block radius. It would have vaporized everything. But I did not, I should say, at the shop, I did have a chance to crank it a little bit. And they talk about your pants flapping from turning up.
Oh yeah.
You, I did not understand what it meant to play a real tube amp until I cranked a Super Lead 100 past like 4.
Yeah.
It was ungodly. I mean, and the not needing an overdrive pedal and just hearing the power amp distortion, it was like the guitar was playing itself at
Yeah.
that point. It was unbelievable.
Well, and that's one of that you hit on a couple of the drawbacks of tube amps. And that's that, especially single channel amps, like, the Bassman and the, Super Lead and a hundred others, to get that sound that you want out of them, you got to turn them up. And there are ways kind of around it. You can, maybe change the gain structure with preamp tubes. Maybe if it's a 4 power tube amp, you can pull 2 and rebias. You can run an attenuator. You can use earplugs. You can go into a soundproof basement, you know, um, to get that sound. A lot of times you just got to flat out turn them up,
Yeah.
and there are not a lot of opportunities to do that, especially in small clubs. You show up at a small club with a 100-watt super lead and you turn it up to 4, and they're going to throw you out of the building, you know.
Yeah.
And that's one of the downsides. But the upside to that exact same thing is when you're running your amp loud like that, you can really control a lot of the feel and the volume and the tone with that little volume pot on your guitar. I'm using my
Wait, whoa,
pinky.
whoa, wait. The guitars have a volume pot?
Yeah, and a tone pot, believe it or
Wait,
not,
and they're meant to be used while you're playing.
while you're playing.
That's fascinating. All right, so let's get into the. I know I'm being a little saucy right now, and I
That's all
apologize
right.
for
You
that.
go right ahead.
So let's get into the merits. Because I kind of want to do like Dave Letterman's top 10. We've talked about the merits of tube amps already, like that glorious that
That
glorious
sound.
tone,
Yeah.
that sound, right? And we've talked about the touch sensitivity and responsiveness. And where you were going with that is um, having that having the ability to control everything with the volume and tone on your guitar is that's fun for me. Like
Yeah.
I used to love, I had a Vox AC30. Oh, by the way, a 30-watt amp,
Also
loud.
loud.
Also, right, exactly. Don't ever anyone let anyone tell you a 30-watt amp isn't loud, because that's ridiculous. But had that cranked with a
Put a pin in
you'll
that. I went to see Queen when they toured with Paul Rogers as their singer. And at one point in about the third song, the mains went out. And I was 20 rows off the stage on Brian May's side of the stage. And the
wow.
only thing anybody could hear when the mains went out was his amps, his AC30s. And you could hear them with the mains out.
Wow.
Please continue.
And so one of the few guitar players who toured with the wall of Vox AC30s and was using all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't for show. So I had a rig where I had a Vox AC30, not cranked because loud, but I had a distortion pedal always on. The pedal fed the amp always on, and there was no channel switching.
Nope.
Everything was done clean to distorted and everywhere in between with the volume control. And I also had learned this trick from Steve Morse, who's a master at it. I can't do
Yeah.
it the way he does. When the
Right.
vocals were on, he would crank the tone back a little on the guitar.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really cool, like, how do you think of things like that? But I thought, how respectful. Like he's like, here's Steve Morse, who's God's gift to guitar, and he's like, oh, the guy from Deep Purple, the singer, is singing, Ray Gillen singing, or whoever's singing. I'm Ian Gill. I'm going to turn the tone down. Okay, now solo time, tone back up. Like that's just respectful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. All right, but I learned volume control manipulation from Eddie Van Halen.
Oh yeah.
Did it all the time. A lot of times, just even in like, I know Hot for Teacher, right? Everyone that bombastic intro with tapping full on over, and then for the verse, cranks it back, and then no channel switching. Then he does a little finger picking part, and then for when the first verse kicks in, brings it back up. No channel switching. Did it his whole career. Watch Stevie Ray Vaughan do it in the early '80s. Watched Richie Blackmore do it. And so I just grew up watching guitar players who use the volume and tone on their guitar. And I just thought that's how you do it.
Yeah.
So a lot of amps have only one channel. These tube amps have one channel. They're one great channel, but it's one channel.
Yeah.
And you have to do the work, but it's fun. Like it makes it fun.
Yeah. And
is that weird that's fun for me? I don't know. That's weird.
Not at all, man. It's awesome. And another couple of really great things about tube amps is, especially the ones that have simple circuits, you can modify them. You can change a couple of resistors, a couple of capacitors, and you can really alter the overall tone of the amp, how it responds to your guitar, how it responds to your pedals. Those things, tube amps are great, what they call pedal platforms,
Right.
to put your pedals in front of. They work really well with that. And you can even now, if you want to, you can build your own tube amp. You can buy a kit. Mojo Tone is not the only group selling them, but they make kits that are very accessible. But that also kind of pushes towards some of the drawbacks too, which is working on a tube amp can kill you.
Yeah. Did you know there was a thing called a death cap?
Yeah. You touch that and you die.
Yeah. Like, okay. All
Yeah.
right, you know what? I'm going to take this to a qualified technician.
Yeah. Capacitors store electricity and they can store
Right.
lethal voltages, and that's dangerous. And if you don't know what you're doing, don't open up your tube amp,
Yeah.
you know. And I don't want to say I know what I'm doing when it comes to amps. I have a fairly decent idea after years of dealing with them and trying to figure out how to do things. And pretty much all I will do now is I'll change tubes and I will clean pots, and that's it.
Yeah.
And anything else, I take it. I don't know how to bias an amp. I'm not interested in learning how to bias an amp. I take it to my guy.
I don't like how tube amps forced me to open them and bias them, because they did. Where
Yeah.
I live, there are not a lot of really good amp techs that don't have a massive backlog. And taking your amp to them for a biasing is expensive, and you would wait forever. And so here I was, because every time you get a new set of tubes, you're biasing just to
Yeah.
be on the safe side. And here I am taking a very heavy amplifier out of its chassis, um, and fiddling around inside an amplifier with capacitors that can kill you so I can
Trying not to
bias an amp.
die.
Yeah, I mean, I did not like that. I did, and I mentioned weight. What is the deal, he said, with tube amps?
Yeah.
Why do the transformers have to weigh 40,000 pounds? What is going on in there?
Electricity.
Yeah, it's really inconvenient. I hurt my back loading gear. That's how
Did
I
you
hurt my
really?
back.
It
Yep.
was the AC30, wasn't it?
Anyway, uh, good guess, Wes. It was actually,
There's a reason they put three handles on the top of those things.
yeah. Well, and the speakers too, by the way. The speakers aren't
Yeah.
light. The
No.
speakers themselves are ridiculous. So
72-pound magnets in them.
right. So I'm sitting here talking about how great they sound and how amazing they respond to pedals, but don't lift them.
Yeah.
Don't take them room to room. And God forbid you try to take it to a gig. So definitely some drawbacks there. And how about this? Where I was joking about the death of tube amps, and the question that comes up is, will digital modelers kill tube amps? No.
No. I mean,
Tubes
we started
will
talking
kill
about
tubes
tubes.
will
Yeah.
kill tube amps. The price of tubes and the current lack of decent quality tubes are going to drive tube amps right into the ground right now.
Yeah. It's definitely a possibility. There are still I think there are a very small number of tube manufacturing concerns in the world. They're all in Eastern Europe or China. Some of them are in Russia. There's one in Slovakia. That's JJ Tubes. All the rest are in Russia or China because manufacturing tubes has a big ecological footprint.
Right.
It creates a lot of toxicity that has to get, stored somewhere or
And
dumped somewhere.
right. So
So
that's another reason why it's getting harder to, tubes are not ecologically friendly.
no,
They don't come from stable places in the world right now. They're expensive, they're hard to get, the quality isn't good, and they're unreliable.
they can be, absolutely. I would say that probably mostly about Chinese tubes. They are getting better. Russian tubes, companies like Ruby Tubes and Electro Harmonics, their factories are in Russia and they have pretty good quality control. But there's a reason I use JJ Tubes, and it's not just reliability. I don't want to get into all that. But that we'll just leave it at that.
But I also understand that a lot of the companies that resell like JJ, when they get a batch of tubes, they have to test all of them, and then they're throwing them a bunch out so that you don't do that.
Yep, absolutely.
So, right, it's just a necessary thing to do right now, and it's getting worse. So if anything's going to kill tube amps, it's going to be tubes.
Yeah. And then we have two choices besides. And people have been talking about the death of the tube amp since what, the 1960s is when the first reliable, good sounding, decent sounding solid state amps came about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So in the mid 60s, and specifically because of all the problems we were talking about with tube amps, companies started introducing solid state amps. Now, by then, solid state electronics had been introduced in other parts of the country, radios and whatnot. So they were a reliable. they were reliable. That was one of the things they knew about it. And so if you look on Reverb or eBay or really anywhere that you'll find used musical instruments, you're going to find solid state amplifiers from all sorts of companies, including many that make tube amps, because they were thinking we need to find a way to, like, you know, make these make good amplifiers that are cheaper, easier, more reliable.
Yeah,
If you remember Customs,
I
um,
do, with a
yeah,
K.
yeah, and they had the padding all around
Yeah.
them. Oh, they were so sexy. And other companies like K, but there were companies like Gibson, Vox, and Fender that had made tube amps forever, and now all of a sudden they were making solid state amps.
Yeah, my
Um,
first amp was a PV Bandit 112. It was absolutely solid state, and it
my
sounded decent as long as you didn't turn it up too loud.
Yep, me too. PV Bandit, way to go. I also had crates. Remember
Yep, me
crates? They
too.
were great economic solution. Um, like you mentioned, PV, there's Sun, Ampeg. Music Man, I threw in here because they made a hybrid. Now they did make hybrid amps. They were
Yeah.
solid state preamps and tube power amps, because really the issues at the time were not with power tubes. Power tubes were very reliable. It was preamp tubes. They were microphonic and they would make noise. And so they came up with a solid state hybrid amp. And then you had Carvin. Carvin made a lot of solid state amps back in the
Yeah,
day. And then you had
absolutely.
Marshall had valve state, if you
Yeah.
remember Marshall. Yeah. So
Yeah, and now I think they've flipped that around. When they talk about a hybrid amp, it usually has a preamp tube or two in it and a solid state power section.
mhm.
I wouldn't swear to it, but the solid state amps they were lighter. They didn't need maintenance. You never have to rebias a solid state amp, um, because they were made with transistors and whatnot instead of tube sockets and all that stuff. They were cheaper. They could be manufactured more reliably overseas, which was, that's a real important concern when you're talking about the bottom line. They could get just as loud or louder than tube amps, but you
Absolutely.
could also you can get really great sound at a low volume. So you can play it in your basement without irritating your friends and family or the neighbors if you live in a townhouse.
And
Um,
solid state amps were the first ones I saw with headphone jacks.
yeah, absolutely.
It was amazing. Wait,
Absolutely.
you mean I can play this and not annoy my parents? Win
Yeah.
win.
Yeah. And like I mentioned, the Fender M80 that I have, um, that the clean channel on that thing is sparkly Fender. If I played you a recording of it, you wouldn't know it wasn't a classic Fender amp.
Right.
But the dirty channel on that thing stinks.
Mm.
I mean, it's just terrible.
Was
And
the
it gets
M for mush?
mush. Yeah. It gets
Okay.
worse as you turn the gain up.
Yeah.
It's passable at low gain. You could use it for like a overdrive sound, but you start turning it up and it just gets terrible. But I've kept this thing for now probably close to 30 years because of that clean channel, man. you
Well,
know?
yeah, I mean, people were, let's not forget the Roland Jazz Chorus was a
Oh
solid
yeah.
state amp, and that
And
had
that's
one of the most glorious
oh
clean
yeah,
sounds.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
you know, before we get to the drawbacks of solid state amps, because there's really not that many, but they are big ones, I have to say that the big drawback that we always want to talk about with solid state amps is the tone.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I got to tell you, so in the last couple of years, Orange has released the
Mhm.
Crush series.
Yeah, and they
Um,
sound pretty good.
they sound really good. I mean, really good, and not just recorded, but in the room. Like they sound really legit. And what's going on with Fender and the Tone Master series? Is that what it's called? Tone Master?
Yeah,
Um,
that's like that's almost a hybrid solid state digital, right? Because when I think digital, I think modeling. That's what
mhm.
when I say digital, the word in my head is modeling. And those tone masters are modeling amps. They're just modeling one amp,
Oh, okay.
you know?
So I feel like, I mean, I don't know if the Orange Crush is any indication of like what's possible in 2023, but I feel like that, if tubes continue to be economically unsound and they continue to be, for the most part, fairly unavailable and expensive, maybe manufacturers will start putting more time and energy into R&D on solid state circuits that don't suck, and you
Yeah.
get more things like the Orange Crush, because that thing, I was amazed. Um, I haven't seen King's X live. I know people that have, and they said guys using Orange Crush is live, and he sounds as good as you expect Ty Tabor to sound. So
Yeah. And his like grail tone from the early King's X albums was all solid state.
all solid state.
Yeah, it was all solid.
Exactly.
It was a, I think I want to say it was an old Gibson amplifier. I could be wrong.
It was
I
a
used
Gibson Lab series. Yep.
lab
L5.
lab.
Yep.
Yeah. And you know, and he certainly is somebody that I have followed for decades and paid attention to his tone as it's changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I used to poo-poo solid state until I found out he used solid state. And I can't complain about, like, the first 3 King's X albums sound amazing,
Yeah.
you know?
Unique. They sound really unique.
Yeah.
And a lot of, in fact, I think in addition to the Gibson Lab series, which is not some holy grail of tone, he also got most of his effects from fairly inexpensive rack
Yeah.
units back in the day that were also not expensive. And all
Yep.
that means is what we've all known all along, which is it's not the gear, it's the player.
Yeah. Yeah.
He made that crap gear sound unbelievable and
Yeah.
iconic, and it's, you know, something we still listen to today, and it holds up.
Yeah. And it's funny too. And we probably will do a whole episode on this sooner or later. You know, you listen to him throughout his career. You know, I've got their newest album right here behind me, and it still sounds like them.
Right.
You know, he still sounds like him when he plays guitar,
Right.
whether he's using tube amps or old Gibson Labs. You know,
Yep.
and there's a lot of room to that. And
Yep.
so you said you had a PV Bandit, just like I did.
Mm-hmm.
And you had some crates. Did you have any other obviously solid state amps?
I was one of the lucky fellas in the community to have one of the first Schultz Rockmans, and also a Tech 21 Sans amp when they
Now,
first hit the market.
is the Rockman, is that a solid state amp, or is that an early modeling amp?
It is a solid state. So I know we had some back and forth on that. The Schultz Rockman was 100% solid state.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I'll allow it.
and really, like, I mean, for its time, it was amazing. Built-in effects, it sounded phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize how many people Joe Satriani used it for his first couple albums, and then later on, not Rockman's, but the preamps that he put out, Def Leppard used those on the whole Hysteria album.
I just heard about that too, especially like if you hear a clean guitar on Hysteria, it was a Schultz like Rockman amp.
Yep.
You know, they made this little, I think it was a 110 or a 1.8. And that's what Def Leppard used for all of the cleans on Hysteria. And those were pretty shimmering cleans.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Built-in compression, it was everything.
Yeah. And that was a Mutt Lange production, wasn't it? And that dude he's no joke. He doesn't suffer poor tone.
No, there was something, I've read so many articles about the making of that album and why they decided to go that route, but they were looking to achieve something very specific.
Yeah.
And when they had to introduce electronic drums because of Rick, they leaned heavy into technology on that record, and it turned out to work out extremely well for them. That was a very clean, unique sounding recording. And I mean, I can't picture any of those songs with regular like tube amps or anything. It just wouldn't sound the same.
Yeah. Well, and at that point, yeah, when your drummer is horribly mutilated in a car crash and still comes back and can still play the drums with electronic, you know, assistance, why not just lean into it? You know, in for a penny, in for a pound. There's a reason.
Exactly.
There's that phrase comes from England. Number one, pound is British money, and that's where it comes from. So, you know, they get it. And if you're if you're going to lean that heavily on technology for one guy, you might as well. And frankly, probably at that point, the bass player was probably also using solid state. A lot of bass sets, I think people overlook that. Most bass amps, they might have a tube preamp, maybe the higher end ones, but most bass amps are full solid state because
Yep.
you get more power. And you know, it's, you got to have, bass has to have a lot of juice to be effective on stage, you know,
Yep.
not necessarily in a front of house mix, but you know, in a basement or on a stage in a small club. I think, you know, watt for watt, you need more bass power than you do guitar power to get the same effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I could, you know, not an expert, but from my understanding, can given the needs of a bass player, um, I think solid state is a solid choice. I mean, it's you need to be able to have clean power at very high, you know, high volumes.
Yeah.
And I think pushing at the low end like you are, I think I don't think tube amps, I don't think they do the same. I don't think you can get the same low end out of, I could be wrong, but I think in where the bass amps live in that part of the spectrum, I think solid state makes sense.
Yeah. And
Um
when I think of Sans amp, I think of bass,
yeah.
even though I know that they do a lot of stuff for guitar, because I know of so many bass players that use Sans amp and swear by their stuff.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe that's I don't, even though I play bass from time to time, I don't consider myself a bass player, so I've never really gotten too deeply into a bass rig.
Hmm.
Um, when I play bass, I play it through a guitar amp. That's what I got the Supro Thunderbolt 2 for.
Yep.
It's got a 115, and bass sounds absolutely incredible through that thing.
That's cool. I remember there was a guy I played that played bass in one of my bands, and he was known for having the refrigerator, the Ampeg,
Oh yeah,
the 810 cabinet, the whole deal, the tube head.
SVT.
Yep. And I don't remember why, or I just he showed up for practice one day and he just walked in with a Sans amp and he's like, I'm ready to go. And we're like, what is going on
What
here? He was like,
what's the matter with you?
yeah, it was just night and day. But
Yeah.
he was getting the same incredible tones just in a box that was the size of a pedal. It's yeah.
Yeah, when the last bass player I played with that used the full SVT, you know, amp and 810, um, he had, I don't know what kind of car it was. It was a Toyota or a Honda or something. And it would fit, that 810 would fit in the back seat, but he had to roll both windows down. So, you know, hot, cold, didn't matter. Those windows had to be down, or, you know, the edges, the corners of it stuck out.
No one
It
else
was
was coming to the gig with
hilarious.
him. It was him and his amp. No one else was coming.
Yeah, he had to put his bass in the front seat, you know. Um, and the last time I played bass in an organized band, I used his amp as my practice rig that was in the space where we practiced.
Mhm.
So I used it a lot, but I didn't use it for shows because I wasn't going to hump that thing up the stairs out of a basement. That thing,
Mm-mm.
no,
No,
no, not happening. 810s. I mean, oh, but you cannot deny the tone.
that was just incredible.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that's where we're at, right? We're chasing tone, and I mentioned that before. And here's the thing that I think, right? You can get, I don't want to speak for you. I can get 90% of my tone that I want to hear me sound like when I play guitar from just about any amp. It's that last 10% that makes a difference in which amp I'm using and what I'm trying to do with it.
mhm.
But that's the most important 10% for me.
Yep. I would not argue with that. When I first switched to the Kemper, the the first few things I recorded with it, I was blown away by um, how easily I was able to mix, how quickly I was able to get those tones in the first place, and you know I didn't miss um, the having to mic up a speaker in a room where I can't control the, the reflections, and playing around with speaker positioning
Yeah.
and muffling and laying carpets and all that. I mean, it was so fast and it was so easy. And like I said, when you're mixing, at no point did I say, wow, this doesn't sound like a tube amp. I can't use this. Um, it's really, there's two places where I felt like it just didn't, like I said, it was 90% there. One was in a live setting when I was used to hearing my amp from behind me, and I was now no longer doing that. Instead, I would set up, a full range flat response in front of me as a monitor, which sounded okay, but it certainly didn't have that same feel, and
Right.
it didn't have a three-dimensional sound that I was used to, but it was good enough to get by. And the other place was, just practicing here in my room. This is obviously, I'm, working in a small space here. But even at lower volumes with an attenuator, it is so much more enjoyable to play through tube amps. And just to, again, it's three-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's a clarity and a crispness. Words is difficult. um it's a crispness, and that, like it just it's that 10%. So I'm willing to argue that that 10% is a trade-off for the convenience, the flexibility, the great effects, the quick teardown, the ease on my back. I'm willing to give that 10%, but there's times when I don't want to,
Yeah.
and it works out fine. Now, if I had to record a tube amp right now, I couldn't do it with a microphone. I have the UA aux box back there, and that's been working out really well. But again, it's more technology that's enabling me to use my tube amps the way I want to use them, which is
Yeah.
cranked up and loud. So, again, it's still technology, right? So I'm even capitulating that for all that tube amps are, it's the drawback is I'd have to mic them up, and I don't want to do that,
Yeah.
right?
And I get that too. I'm in a pretty I'm pretty fortunate in my situation. I have a house with two bedrooms upstairs, and one of the rooms is my office slash studio that you see me in right now, and the other one is my daughter's room, but she's moved out, so technically it's the spare room, but it's where she stays when she comes to visit. And I can I can run I put my amps in there in her
Mm-hmm.
bedroom and mic them up and close the door. So I plug my guitar into a direct box, and then I run an out. It's an active direct box, so it keeps the signal strong. So I can run 40 foot of cable, between this room and that room, and that's plenty. And I close that door, and I close my door, and I can record in my studio room here. I can hear the amp in the other room, but I don't have to wear headphones when I record, which
Right.
is wonderful. It's almost like having a control room and a sound room.
Sure.
Um, and there, so I'm able to do that. I can run my amp relatively loud. I'm still not going to crank it up, to ridiculous volumes, because I don't need to do that to get the sounds that I want. But I don't know, on the flip side of that, and we'll talk about this in a minute. When I'm just doing a quick demo, or if I need to lay something down just to get an idea out of my head so I don't forget it, I don't bother with all that stuff. I fire up GarageBand and I pick an amp and I plug my guitar into my little, I got it right here. I'm trying to unplug it so I can look at the brand. It's not working. It is a Positive Grid Riff. It looks like that.
I
And
remember them.
it's not, I think it was $100, and it works great. It gets my guitar signal into the computer, and I did it. As a matter of fact, I did it this morning. I put down three guitar tracks, a bass track, and electronic drums. And I did it in about an hour just to get an idea out of my head so I wouldn't forget it.
There you go.
and done, and it's hard to beat that kind of convenience. But I personally would never release that to the public as a finished product.
Okay.
I don't, I'm sure other people would listen to it and go, hey man, that sounds great. But I don't know if I could, this sounds so dramatic. I don't know if I could live with myself, Andrew, if I did that, just knowing that it was done all in the computer. But when you start talking about digital modeling and things like that, I remember the original Line 6 pod. That was
Yeah.
my first experience with modeling, and it was not good.
No.
It was not good.
No. So yeah, the the all the turning point for guitar tech was 1996. So you may remember the Line 6 pod, but their first product was the Axis 212. It
Ooh,
was actually a
Axis.
yeah, it was actually a 212 combo amp. I
It
never
probably
had
weighed
one.
14 pounds too.
Probably, right. But it was popular enough that you know it enabled them to push forward with that pod, right? So
Right.
that was introduced in '99, almost at the turn of the century, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But you know, I wish I could do a whole show just on Line 6 because people don't realize, maybe they don't realize, maybe today. I mean, how groundbreaking this was at the time when people like us who had grown up on tube amps were now being told, hey, all those great tube amps, this isn't solid state. We're literally telling you that we meticulously modeled every component of those amplifiers that you know
Yeah.
and love and recreated them in the digital realm.
In this tiny box.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. We're talking about a time when iMacs were enormous and fruit colored, right?
uh,
Uh, and
the good old days.
yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And so that's 1999. So we're now 24 years since then. And they're not going, these things are not going anywhere. In fact,
No, I think they might be the way of the future. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, Fender is embracing modeling technology with the Tone Master series,
mm-hmm.
and they're modeling their classic amps and making them far more affordable. I mean, those Tone Master amps and I'll be honest with you, I thought about getting one.
Good pedal platform, lightweight.
Yeah, I think I looked and it was 26 pounds,
half of a tube combo.
Oh, easily. And well, see, here's the thing though, right? So you had a Kemper. We talked about Dave Murray now using the Axe FX. Those are really kind of the two big from my perspective, those are the two big names in high-end professional level modeling amplifiers. I know there are others. I'm not familiar with the brands, and I have never used one of these things. As a matter of fact, I don't think I ever even saw one in person until about a week and a half ago.
Okay.
I know what they are. I've seen pictures, I've watched videos. I'm not a, completely ignorant, but I have never wanted to even try one. And it has nothing to do with how flexible they are, how many sounds you can plug in, how well or poorly they sound. It has to do with, I make my living in front of a computer. And when I sit down to play guitar, I don't want to use another computer to get my sound. I want to spin some knobs and I want to hear some sound, and that's the experience that I want to have. I don't, and of course I just said I use GarageBand, and when I record for real, I use Pro Tools. So I'm using a computer, but to me, it's not the same because I'm not tone shaping with a computer. And because I know me, and I know I will tweak and tweak and tweak, and I will never be happy with the sound coming out the other end. And that's completely personal. It has nothing to do with the Kemper or the Axe FX or the Line 6. and I know this because I told you early on, I have a line 6 duotone, which is it's a version. It's not super, it's not got everything. I think the only effect it has is reverb, and it's got two banks of knobs, and it's knobs. It's very few buttons. It's mostly knobs. And it's got all the different models in it. And you can, the thing about it is you can have one amp on or the other, or you can blend them together. So you can really get a lot of really cool sounds out of this thing. But for me, I was willing to use that modeling amp because it's all right on the front panel. It's all knobs, and I can spin, and there's 4 buttons, and I can press a button and save the sound. And if you plug in the foot pedal, then you can have banks and you can save a bunch more sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I used that for a very specific, I was in a band. I call myself the stunt guitar player in that band. I was playing with 2 songwriters who have been together for a very long time. At one point, they played together in a signed band. And what they would do is they'd get together and they'd record a song, and they would then want to play it live, but the singer had to sing and play guitar, and so he couldn't do all the extra stuff. So they said, well, we need another guitar player. Who can we find that will play all this stupid stuff that we've added to this song,
right,
and play it like it is? And one of them said, hey, we should call Wes. And so they called me, and I was like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. And it was, except I had to cover a vast amount of tonal distance,
right,
based on the song. And so I had patches for each song that I programmed into this duo head, whatever it's called. I forget now. I think I said duo verb several times. That may or may not be the actual name. And and I got the big footboard pedal board for it, so I could have all those banks. And I had multiple patches for each song, so that I could sound like what they wanted me to sound like to play the music live.
mm-hmm.
And since I stopped playing with that band, I rarely use it. It's the amp for a long time I left it at my current band's practice space because I didn't need it.
Right. So that's a lot to unpack, and I actually have quite a few thoughts on it. The first thing is, I want to tell you how much I relate to the what I perceive as the paralysis of choice that you get with digital modelers, in that I have a Kemper and I have probably 12 to 20,000 profiles.
Oh my goodness, do you really?
Right. Now, granted, since may not be familiar, a lot of these profile packs that are commercially available, I don't know if you know that you can buy profile packs. They're variations on a theme. So someone will say, we modeled the Marshall JM, the JTM 45.
Right.
Okay. Well, they'll create multiple profiles of this amp, because every time you spin a knob or change the gain setting or move the microphone or change speaker cabinet, that's another profile.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they'll create
that makes sense.
a lot of right. So I may have 20,000 profiles. It's still a lot. And that's a lot of different amps and cabinets and everything, but it's a lot of the profile packs that you get. It's like one amp, maybe 20 profiles of that amp.
Gotcha.
Or you might get someone like Michael Britt, when he does his profile packs, he'll do a lot of different amps, and he'll give you like 3 or 4 really good ones, because I think even Michael understands, look, just give them the meat and potatoes. They don't need 50 profiles of an amplifier. Just give them like 2 or 3 good ones.
Yeah.
And he's right. They're actually the ones I usually use. They're like my go-to 90% of the time. But you're still right that there's a paralysis of choice. So even if I want to be really authentic, let's say I'm covering a song and I know the guitar player used a very specific amplifier, specific set of pedals and everything, and I try that. Well, of course, it's not going to sound right because I'm not that person and I don't know that exact gear and those exact settings. So I'm tweaking and I'm looking at different profiles, and I'm never getting to playing. I'm looking through profiles. I'm tweaking. It's so much. But that's again, like you said, that's a me thing, right? Yeah. I also know people that have the ability, and I envy them, who just pick a profile and start playing.
Yeah,
Right.
like Dave Murray, we use the JMP1 setting.
He's done.
Done, you know.
Done. I sound like Dave Murray. Um,
Yeah, but I know I couldn't do that. I know when I recorded, so as you know, but not everybody knows, I used to be in a band called the Pharmacy Prophets, and we did a full length album, and I recorded that entire album with one amplifier, and you wouldn't know it from listening to it because there's a wide variety of tones. And basically what I would do is I would, in between songs, and sometimes even in between tracks, individual takes, I would zero out the knobs and start over
mm,
and get another sound so that everything didn't sound exactly the same, because at the time that was important to me,
okay.
and now, 20 years, yeah, 20 years later, I recognize some of the virtues of having your one sound and just rocking that.
Well, think back to your duo verb days. So when you were using the duo verb, you were using it because you had to fill in and play all the bits and bobs that
Right.
were right. So you used the a digital modeler and multiple patches to enable you to quickly and easily switch between probably widely disparate sounds.
Yeah.
Okay. At the time that you were doing that, there weren't really a lot of easy or inexpensive options to do that in the tube amp world.
No, and to do it with pedals, I would have had to have a pedal board the size of a airplane cockpit.
Well, and possibly a MIDI switcher, which back then was
Yeah, it's hugely
nearly
expensive.
prohibitively expensive. It's actually getting easier and less expensive now to do those things. There are
Yeah.
products on the market that are enabling pedal owners and tube amp users to, I get, quickly switch, but it's still not going to be as easy and you know, as inexpensive as it is to just get a digital modeler.
Yeah.
If you can get over the Moore's law factor, which is these things
That's
get more complicated by the second.
Yeah, and that's the Moore's law, is the obsolescence thing, right?
Yeah, and so I was going to ask a question and see. There's no right answer, so you can make something up. Um, from the time that Leo Fender created the 59 Bassman till, I don't know, yesterday, how many how much has the tube amp really changed? Just tube amps. How much has it really changed?
I think probably, other than adding capability,
Effects loops and master volumes,
yeah, effects loops, master volumes,
external bias ports.
yeah,
What am
things
I?
like that.
Channel switching.
It hasn't really changed a whole lot. I
No,
mean,
channel switching was the big one.
yeah,
Effects
but
loop.
even then, really all you're doing is you're putting two small amps inside of one big amp. And I mean, there is certainly, they share tubes, they share gain stacks, so there's kind of the routing of the signal through the
So
tubes.
arguably, if I never showed you two tube amps and I sat you in front of both of them and said dial in a tone, if you figured out one, you could probably figure out the other in a
Yeah,
matter. Okay.
yeah, I feel very confident in saying that.
What's it? So that was 59. It's 2023. What's that? What's math? That's at 1,000 years.
that's
Okay. So
that's
tube amps don't
at least.
tube amps don't change. Okay. And there's a reason for that. They work. The
Yeah.
design has been, I mean, it's for all its flaws, it works. Now, since 1999, how much have the digital modelers changed?
Oh man, I don't even know if I could put a number on that. 100
Well,
times over, 1,000 times over.
I mean, every time, every year there's a new model. The processors are getting more powerful. They're getting
Yeah.
smaller, so they can put more in there.
Right.
Um, the effects are getting better. The how they model is changing. I mean, when you're in the digital realm, you're dealing with Moore's law of obsolescence, right? And
Yeah.
so things are going to exponentially improve. It's only been 24 years since the pod.
Right.
And look where we are with the Kemper. And the
Yeah.
Kemper's been out for a while. So if you think about it, it hasn't been 24 years, but now you have the Kemper, line 6 has the Helix.
Yep.
You have the Axe effects. Now Neural DSP has hit the market with the Quad Cortex. That's been a couple years. That's gaining popularity. These things are getting more powerful much faster than tube amps evolved.
Yeah.
Um,
I wonder how long it's going to be until we have an AI powered guitar amp where you can say to it, I want to sound like Jimi Hendrix, and it and you play your guitar and you have a credible Jimi Hendrix tone.
yeah.
I mean, why can't that happen?
Right. So, I
But
mean, I think where I'm going with that was you mentioned about, I don't want to sit in front of a computer. Like that's a real thing for certainly for our generation. Look,
yeah,
let's go where we have to go. For our generation, this technology is very new. It's growing and rapidly changing. How much of it is just like, I don't want to, guitar should be more complicated than putting toast in a toaster. Like we're guitar players, okay? I'm not sending anything to the freaking moon. Like I want to just play guitar. And yes, sifting through menus to find a parameter, it starts to get a little like you're taking the art out of art.
yeah, yeah.
I don't want to do that anymore. Listen, I've been a loyal Kemper user for many years. And again, I've done some really, really great recordings with it. And to listen to them, you'd never go, oh, that's clearly not a tube amp.
Yeah,
This sucks.
clearly a modeler.
Right. So there's no shame. And I still have the Kemper and I'm going to continue to use it because there's places and times when it absolutely it can't be beat.
Yeah,
But there's still about 1,000 things on that thing I haven't touched yet. Like, because I just don't want to get into it. I can't
yeah,
get into it. I want to find a patch. I want to quickly edit it and move on with my life.
that makes sense. Yeah, I get that. And let me ask you. Here's something I'm curious about, because I have had this happen to me at a gig, literally 10 minutes before my band is supposed to start playing, and I'm on stage. I'm getting my stuff ready to go, and I turn my amp on, and I got no sound coming out of it. I look around the back. I got a dead tube. I go in my gig bag, grab a replacement tube out of my gig bag, turn the amp off, plug the tube in, turn the amp on. I'm back on.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do if your modeling amp goes on the fritz and 5 minutes before a gig?
Pray you have a spare, borrow it someone else's. I'm telling you, that's an excellent point. So I had a gig it was an outdoor function. Something happened, and it was a Rivera I was using. It was a Rivera K-Tray, 120 watt. Yeah, it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was a
Yeah.
412. I had no business.
Veras were so heavy, but they sounded so good.
They built them to withstand nuclear war.
Clearly,
they overbuilt them and really, I don't want to do. I could do a whole thing on Rivera. I used them for a long time.
we both did.
Yeah, it's true. They built them. No, they had no business building them that ridiculously. Like but something happened to mine, and it was a fuse or something, and we were in the middle of nowhere. It was actually at a place called the Flying W. So it was a hub that was right near a landing strip for a local airport. I did have to drive to a local RIP Radio Shack to get fuses because I was too stupid to have backup fuses. Tubes I had plenty of. I had a whole gig bag full of tubes. I'm like, I'm fine if it's a tube. Nice. It wasn't a tube. It was a fuse. Had no extra fuses. They didn't have any in the office that fit. I was like, do you have any fuses in the office? No, I had to drive. But I did replace that fuse and I did go on with the gig. And it turned out that one of my tubes was on the fritz. And
which is why the tube blew. Yeah.
Which is why the tube blew or the fuse blew. And I replaced the bad tube before the next gig. No repair bill, nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, I knew what to do. Right.
Yeah.
And I knew what to do. But I had a gig where my Kemper wouldn't turn on.
What do?
The gig got canceled.
Yeah, turn it on, turn it off, turn it off, turn it on, turn it on, unplug it.
I had a USB port on the Kemper that stopped working. and I had to go back to where I bought it for a repair. And they said, "Oh, good news, you're getting a new Kemper." I said, "What does that mean?" And they said, "Well, it's the USB port, which is part of the motherboard, and Kemper's rules are if it's a
If
part
it's the
on the
motherboard,
motherboard, we
just
replace the
replace the whole
motherboard,
thing.
the whole thing, the motherboard. And when we replace the motherboard, it comes with a new serial number. So technically, you're getting a new Kemper.
Wow.
So there is no repairing. It was we're basically replacing this because it's under warranty now. Kemper, awesome company, stood behind their warranty. Now, here's the other thing, though, I will tell you. I did spend several weeks troubleshooting this through email with Kemper.
Yeah.
They refused to acknowledge that the Kemper was the problem. Okay. I'm saying this out loud.
Right.
They blamed my computers. They blamed my USB cables. They blamed my hubs. They blamed my operating system, everything. Are you doing this? Are you? They had me
Oh,
troubleshooting for weeks.
none of those things would, like, in my mind, I've done a lot of work on computers, and the cable might prevent signal data from getting in or out, but it's not going to prevent the computer from functioning.
Well, and so eventually they gave up and said, "Send it back where you got it. It's still under warranty." And when I sent it to them, they said, "Good news, it's your USB port." They told me the same day they got it.
Yeah.
But it did take Kemper 2 weeks to acknowledge that they were out of, like, they basically what they did was they eliminated user error as much as they could before acknowledging it might be the unit.
Yeah.
And that part kind of upset me because I wasn't able to record for several weeks. I didn't have the collection back there that I have. But
Yeah.
here's the
No,
thing.
no backup.
No, I've had problems with tube amps.
Oh
Most
yeah.
of the time, it's the tube or the fuse, and I replace them and move on with my life. I
Yep.
very rarely have had to take a tube amp in for a major repair.
Yeah. With, in my experience using tube amps, it's a tube, it's a fuse, it's a
When they
I
get
just
old, it's
I
filter
just had
caps that need
this.
to be
Yeah,
replaced.
the filter caps will start to leak,
But they
and that's a
after
that's a
20
pay somebody
years,
else to do it.
yeah,
Pots get dirty, crackly.
that's
Um,
that's a field repair.
yeah, yeah, that's easy. And I had a oh geez, I have every time we talk about this, I think of another amp that I have sitting over there, another tube amp. I've got a Mesa Boogie Rectiverb, um, amazing amp. It thing weighs 900 pounds.
Yeah, they don't make
Um,
those anymore. They were great.
and it
If
fell over. It got knocked over at a gig, and one of the pots took a direct shot from something sticking up out of the floor, and it separated the innards of the pot a
mhm.
little bit. That it messed up the shaft, and so the pot didn't work right. But I had a guy replace that,
Now,
and
if you
it would still work as long as I didn't touch the pot.
right. Well, I mean, it fell over, so it's hard to argue that
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
wasn't just. But like, if you watch so there's a YouTube channel I watch called Psionic Audio, um, and he, I love the guy, very dry sense of humor,
Oh yeah,
very
he's a little crusty, isn't he?
I, but I love him. If
Yeah,
if you're watching, dude, I love you. Um, what I like about his channel though is he tells it like it is,
yeah, yeah.
and he's showing you what can go wrong in a tube amp if you aren't building them right
Right.
and
Yeah,
if you don't take
absolutely.
care of them. And so I know we talk about tube amps that are, they're field repairable and things. Not that we should be repairing tube amps because of, death, but I do see, like, there's things that go wrong with tube amps, and then there's things that go wrong with tube amps, right? And
Right.
when you're building them the way that they're being built these days, how they're being built, you're asking for trouble. I mean, like, I know these aren't like China plates, and we can, it's not crystal. We should be able
Yeah.
to sort of like abuse our stuff. I mean, we're hauling them at gigs and we're dropping them down a couple of steps, and we're like, they need to be able to take some punishment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
right. But if built correctly and used correctly, they're pretty tough.
Yeah.
They're pretty tough.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
repairable in the field. Digital modelers, I don't have a backup Kemper, and I used
Yeah.
to live in fear that the Kemper would go down at a gig, and then it did, and then
And that
the
was
gig
it.
that was
Sorry
it.
guys, we can't play.
I didn't have a backup amp. I just didn't, and now we were the only band that night,
Oh
so there
man.
was no band.
That's just heartbreaking.
Yep.
Plus, then you don't get paid.
That is correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as people would think, because I'm such a tube guy, that I would be opposed to modelers, and I'm really not. And I think that you know using a modeler as simple as the duo verb showed me what's possible,
Hmm.
and I'm just not interested in embracing that technology because, well, just for all the things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
One of the things that I am interested in, though, is I know I'm not going to live in a house that gives me the capacity to put my amps in another room and record at volume for very long.
Hmm.
Not for certainly, maybe for the next 10 or 15 years, but eventually I'm not going to need this house, and I'm going to want to move to someplace smaller. And then I am going to want to record all in my computer. And what I'm really hoping is that the computer stuff picks up. But all I know about computer amp sims is GarageBand. That's the only platform I've ever used them on.
Mm.
Do you know anything else about that stuff that you can tell me that might give me a place to start looking to find
Yeah,
out more?
absolutely. And there's good news in this realm, if I'm being honest. And I'm going to tell you that. So my son is a guitar player. He's 19,
Fantastic.
and he he only so exclusively records with plugins.
Huh.
Exclusively.
He doesn't use does he ever say, "Hey Dad, can I use your amp?"
Not for
Never.
recording. No,
Oh man.
exclusively plugins. So things were a little rocky in the beginning. So the first plugin outside of GarageBand, although GarageBand, um, I've been using off and on for, like, writing and stuff since
Yeah,
its inception. But the first non-GarageBand plugins I ever used was Amplitude by IK Multimedia. That was one of
I've
the
heard of
first to hit the
Amplitude.
scene.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Native Instruments introduced Guitar Rig in 2004.
Okay.
Now, if you're a listener and you like both of these products, awesome. Okay. I didn't
They're
love
also
them.
not paying us.
No, no, not being paid by any of the company. No, no one's paying us. In fact, why is no one paying? Oh, I was never a fan of Amplitude. Did I have both of them? Did I purchase both of those products? Yes, I did. Did I use them in recordings? No, I never.
Gotcha.
So I could never get over that hump. And really, the first plugin I ever used in a recording was a Waves plugin. Waves did a set of plugins with Paul Reed Smith some time ago. They weren't too bad. I
Yeah.
actually used them in a recording, but still not awesome. Not where I feel like we are right now, which is, I think we're practically in what I would consider the golden age of plugins. They're just getting so damn good. So right now, I would call Neural DSP and Brainworks as two major players in the plugin industry, the guitar, simulator plugin industry. Neural DSP, who makes the Quad Cortex, and actually their plugins predate the Quad Cortex, so they were in the plugin business before the Quad business, the hardware business. Neural DSP plugins are good.
Yeah.
How good are they? I would not sell my tube amps to use them, but I would, if I could land on one that I liked enough, I would use it live.
Okay.
And if I wanted a backup to the Kemper, let's say, or I wanted to not use the Kemper, but maybe use a plug-in based rig, bring a laptop, bring a
I was
hardware
just gonna,
controller. I know already we're getting out of the realm of,
well, but I mean, how easy would that be to, throw your laptop in the front pocket of a gig bag and, show up with a few cables and a laptop and send that to front of house and you're done.
when my Kemper went down and I had to send it back for repair. I had a hardware controller, my laptop, and plugins, and that was my rehearsal rig for about a month and a half.
Yeah.
And it sounded really good. Again, we're not getting in the realm of a tube amp,
Right.
but the rehearsal space was very small. We all went noiseless in the room. So the drummer was
Okay.
using e drums. So I couldn't bring an amp because it would have been the only thing in the room making any noise. Um, it sounded really good. First of all, it was stereo. So
Nice.
hearing it, and all the
Like,
effects were panning back and forth, and it was
yeah, it gives you that three-dimensional aspect of it that you were talking about.
yeah.
Well,
Plus, I had
and
my laptop with me, so in between
yeah.
songs, I could surf for porn. Anyway,
Well, hello.
so
Um, but
I
yeah,
don't.
what you're hitting on there is something that I think it kind of gets overlooked in all of this talk about this amp, that amp, digital tube, modeling, whatever, is how your amp sounds when you're home in your room has almost nothing to do with how that amp sounds when you're on stage or in a practice space with the whole band and
Mm,
everybody's playing together. It throws all of those things out the window.
100%.
Yeah. And your drummer doesn't care how good your tube amp sounds. The drummer wants to be able to hear you playing, and that's it.
Yep. Yep. So not only is dialing in tones on a tube amp at home pointless, because once you get in the rehearsal space, it's and you're with band, all bets are off.
Yeah.
But what about if your band is using in-ears?
Right. Yeah. Now
Uh,
you have to do something. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to put together this little portable rig that I could just, plug into a small speaker somewhere and, just maybe even just use a speaker as a monitor
mhm.
instead of sending it to front of house necessarily. I'm still working on that,
So I
but
mentioned Neural DSP, and the reason I
yeah, yeah.
mentioned them, not only because they're good, but they make a plugin that emulates the Tone King Imperial,
No kidding.
and it's good. And I mean,
Huh.
one of the challenges I've always felt that the digital modelers and plugins faced was I think they sound great for high gain settings where there's so much compression, it hardly matters anymore.
Right.
I think they sound great for those crystal clean tones
Yeah.
because I think that's, I don't want to say easy, but I do think it's easier.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And I'll point one more time. I'll point at that M80 that has the great clean channel
Yep.
and the terrible crunch channel.
Yep. I think where these things typically used to struggle is with those edge of breakup
Yeah.
or lower gain crunch. I call them crunch tones. I hate that term, but just lower gain or like edge of breakup. That's where I feel they struggle. Some of them still do. That Tone King Imperial, though, definitely changed my mind about what plugins are capable of. It's really good. And when you combine these plugins with these amazing effects that they all come with, whether it's octave pedals or fuzz pedals or like this really great digital reverb or delay, it's like, why do I want to carry a 1,000 pound tube amp to a gig? Like,
Yeah.
so plugins, I think, are getting better, right? As our computers get better, again, we're back to the Moore's law of obsolescence. As our computers get better and faster, and capable of, you know, more processing, these plugins are going to be able to take advantage of that and get
Yeah.
more. And I do think, look, AI is already coming to computers. You probably know, and again, we may do an episode on this, so I don't want to get too far into it. Isotope has I think it's called Neutron 4 they're up to.
Okay.
Um it's AI mixing.
Well, I, for one, I want to go on record as saying I welcome our future AI overlords.
Yeah. If you I my so again my son I who um far more prolific in the song in the writing and recording department than I am these days. He's been using Neutron and it's I'm not saying he only uses Neutron, right? It's helping him get results faster.
There you
You load
go.
up some plugins, you tell it what you're looking for, it balances things, it finds where there's trouble spots like masking and stuff, and it gives you like a starting point. Is it completely mixing for him? No. But
No.
is it giving him a better starting point? Yeah, and it's getting him there really fast. And so, and that's it's all AI. So we're already there. And I'm kind of excited to see where that technology goes. But I also feel like it's again, we're going to start seeing I think we're going to start seeing AI almost everywhere. And it wouldn't surprise me if these guitar plugins start giving power back to the user. Like right now, Neural DSP is saying, we've modeled this amp, we've modeled that amp. Well, maybe one day soon they'll say, you model your amps. We're going to give you the power to do it now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we're that far off. In fact, Kemper does it. Kemper has you can model your own amps with the Kemper, right? Make profiles, it's called.
Right.
Now they're up in their profiling game with this new technology called liquid profiling. So they're giving us more flexibility. We're not far off from the days where these things almost become like you can't tell the difference anymore. Maybe even in the room, like we talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of playing on a silent stage, I do have to admit, is really appealing to me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
in-ear monitors and just having my own perfect mix and letting the mains do the heavy lifting
Yep.
and not having to worry about competing with them. But and here's something. So we've talked about all these different amps, and looking back over this conversation, I've learned a lot. Thanks. I'm so glad that you know so much about the digital world, because I know almost nothing. And here's my takeaway is we can't stop change. That I want to say that's a fact. Change is going to continue,
Mm-hmm.
but a part of me feels like our preferences as musicians are set so early in our process that it's sometimes, or even often, hard to embrace that change,
I
you know.
agree.
And I think I'm a good example of that, because I will use GarageBand's built-in amp sims to demo all day long, but when it's time to record the keeper tracks, I break out an amp and a microphone,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yep.
know. And I'm just not yet at the point that I trust the digital to get my sound the way I want it every single time, but I'm not opposed to continuing to try.
Look, I've heard your recordings. I've heard I've heard you play live. I've heard what you've done in your personal studio. What I what I like about your sound is I know it's you playing.
Right.
You've used a lot of different guitars, a lot of different amps, a lot of different pedals, but it's you playing. And you're a big, the player is such a huge factor in all of this and their preferences. And um, it's to me this is everything has its place and there's no right and wrong.
Yeah.
So there's nothing. It's great that you have, to me, you have this yourself. Hey Andrew, I know that I need to sit in front of a tube amp, quickly dial it in, or like this is not going to work for me. And that's
Right.
great. There was a time when I didn't really know. I was like, well, I wanted to use tube amps, so I want to use digital. I'm not really sure. Like, it's good that you know that. And so I'm getting there. That's why I know so much about the technology, because I've been like tone chasing for so long, and sometimes I get off of the path. But I think I'm back on my path. I have my preferences. I know, you see what's sitting behind me. I'm back in the tube
Yeah.
amp school because that's what I started with. And so you're right; those things get formed very early, but we're open to having our minds changed in certain situations, and no one can argue. I certainly can't argue that digital modelers made my life much easier after my back injury, and I wouldn't have
Yeah.
been able to play those gigs without it. So,
Well, there you go. And I think that we both learned a little bit, and we're able to transmit some information. I hope people are learning something as well, and giving us comments as to their experiences, their preferences, the amps, the modelers, the sims, the cab, whatever it is they use. What's the cab thing called? Is that a something K? I don't remember. Um, and there's a lot going on there. Um, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some more stuff, hearing from people about their digital experiences, because that's where my knowledge gap is.
mhm.
Um, So do you feel like we've covered that? Do you feel comfortable moving on to our final segment for this episode?
Yeah. So to recap, two BAM's
Yes.
good, everything else bad, right? That's where we landed.
Yeah, that's where we landed.
No, we didn't land
Not
there.
at all.
No, I think we did, and I appreciate you being open to hearing about different things. And I'm looking forward to bringing my Kemper down there one day and having you check it out.
I would enjoy that. That would
And
be a
then I'm
lot of
looking
fun.
forward to you throwing me out after that and telling me never to come back.
Yeah, well, All right. So after our main course, folks, we're going to move on to dessert, because dessert is often not just the best part of the meal, but the most fun. And this is going to be a segment that we call Music That Matters. And each episode, one of us is going to choose an album or a band or a song or something that created or presented music that mattered, not just to us, but to the wider world in general. And because this whole podcast was Andrew's idea, I wanted to give him first shot. So Andrew, tell us about this episode's Music That Matters.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. And thank you, by the way, for agreeing to do this. I'm really excited by this. I know it's first episode, jitters and nerves and everything. I hope we did a good job. But I am so happy to have you on board with this. I couldn't picture doing this with anyone else. So I wanted to
Thanks,
thank you
man.
for that. All right. So my pick for Music That Matters is a little cliche, but it's going to be AC/DC's Back in Black.
Okay. That
Right.
An absolute classic hard rock album. I don't think anybody can debate that. Tell me why this album matters so much.
Okay. So this album doesn't just matter, in my opinion, that doesn't just matter to rock music, but at large. It also personally has some meaning to me. So 10-year-old me, birthday, my father takes me to the local record shop. Kids, record shops were stored. No. So I know I keep doing that. It's a thing now. It's a thing.
Well, I'd argue, sidebar,
They're coming back.
a lot of kids know what a record shop is these
Yeah,
days.
good
Vinyl is
point.
making a huge comeback.
Yeah, see, can't keep a good thing.
Medium.
Words matter. So this album matters to me because my father took me to a record store for my 10th birthday, and because I asked him specifically to do so. So I grew up on a steady diet of Barry Manilow and Anne Murray and Neil
Okay.
Diamond
No Barbra Streisand?
and Barbra Streisand
Oh, my mother loved Barbra Streisand.
and Kenny Rogers.
Yeah, yeah. Dolly Parton, the crossovers.
Okay. I was struggling as a 10-year-old kid to find myself in this musical world. Okay. But I heard of rock music, and of course, I wanted to know what rocks and music had to do with each other. So I told my father to take me to a music store to let me buy some rock albums. This is what I said to him at 10 years old. We go into the music store. I ask the guy, "Where's the rock section?" Okay. He points me to the rock section, and right, it's over there, kid. Strictly on album art alone. Only album art. I had no idea who these bands. Can I plead? 10 years old.
Yeah.
I didn't know who these bands were. Album art alone. I was allowed to pick 3 albums. They were Paradise Theater by Styx.
Great album cover.
Time by ELO.
Another great album cover.
And None More Black by AC/DC.
Absolutely.
Okay. I didn't know anything about any of these bands. I
didn't know lightning
who,
bolt on it, man.
Right.
That's how you know that was serious stuff. It had a lightning bolt on it.
And it was like embossed, like it was raised.
Yeah.
Okay. I can only tell you that when I got home, I had to play the black one first because it was all black and it looked evil
and tough.
Yep. But when I took the album sleeve out of I took the record. I forget what they call them. The record comes in a sleeve, take it out.
The cardboard is the jacket, the paper is the sleeve.
Thank you. Somewhere in there was a big picture of all the bands, but the big picture was Angus Young on stage lights behind him, sweat like coming off his hair. And I'm like, I want to be that guy when I grow up.
Playing that
And
SG.
playing that right with a white pick guard. I'll never forget. Black with a white pick guard. And I put that album on and it changed my life forever. I
Yeah,
mean,
because
from
it's
that,
bong. We're not playing anything from the album to avoid any possible copyright issues, but bong. I mean, I I would have a hard time finding an album that has a more compelling opening note than Back in Black, than Hell's
yeah.
Bells off Back in Black. That is, from my perspective, it is the perfect
But
start to an
didn't
iconic album.
didn't you time it? How long is that intro? Like until they really get into it.
From the first bong until the first sung note is 86 seconds,
I
almost a
mean,
minute and a half.
that that's that's unheard
Crazy.
of.
Yeah.
And if you so let's get into it. It was released in 1980.
Right.
Think about
Forever, 100 years ago.
right. Think about what was going on in music in 1980. First of all, disco was coming back.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people in 1980 would argue it had never really gone away.
Right.
You know,
It was
huge genre in the 70s.
yeah, disco was everywhere, and rock music was not. It was. I'm not saying it was dead because people have been saying rock is dead for a while. I'm just saying think about what was going on in the 80s or 1980, and then to hear this album. This also, by the way, Robert Mutt Lang, right? We talked about and Tony Platt engineered, but Mutt Lang produced, and
I
he had
didn't know that
also
until you told me the other day that Mutt Lang produced Back in Black. I had no idea.
yeah, he goes back a while, right?
Yeah.
Like again, this guy doesn't make a bad record. If the when he finally does sing, Brian
That sound.
Johnson's, I mean, is there just the thickness of the guitars and just the anger and the rage in those it's just the rage in his vocals that the I mean it's just that album birthed a million copycat bands, right?
Oh, 100%.
How many
Absolutely.
singers have we heard over the years are like that sounds like Brian Johnson, that sounds like Brian Johnson, like he
Yeah.
just birthed a million copycats. But you pointed out something so crazy. First of all, this is the first album following the death of their lead singer Bon Scott from alcohol poisoning. And wasn't it ballsy to put a song on the record, Have a Drink on Me?
Absolutely.
Like, no apologies. Like, sorry he died, but we're still AC/DC.
Yeah.
And I mean, they wrote this album with Bon Scott in mind, and he just never got a chance to perform on it. But they didn't back down from that. And also, like you said, 86 seconds until you finally hear the new singer. Like, I mean, it's just a ballsy record. The
Yeah.
ballsy sounding and the decisions they made. There's a reason why this album cemented, in my opinion, their place in rock history. And in my psyche, I never forgot the first time I heard that record. And in fact, immediately went out and bought every magazine I could that had Angus Young in it.
Nice. Yeah.
And
I would say AC/DC was a good band before Back in Black. And from Back in Black, starting then, they were a great band.
yeah,
And that sound, somebody, one of them, maybe it was Angus, maybe it was Brian, we're going first name basis here, they're buddies,
mm-hmm.
said once upon a time, and it may be an apocryphal story at this point, that they got a negative review because the new album sounded just like the last album. And whoever it was either Brian Johnson or Angus Young, said that clearly that reviewer is not following our career, because all of our albums sound like that. We've been making the same album for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make an album, when you make an album that sounds like Back in Black, and you keep making albums that sound like Back in Black, you're cementing a legacy is what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're inspiring other people to make music and man, play it just as loud as you possibly can.
They were unapologetic in how they did not change. They did not evolve. And look, I respect bands that do, but there's something really, really impressive about a band that's like, this is what we do, and we do it better than anybody else, and we're not changing.
Yeah,
And I like I said, it was. I've only come to appreciate that album more as I've gotten older, not less.
absolutely.
That record has not aged at all. You could put it out today and it would still stand the test of time because it just sounds amazing. The songs are great,
Yeah.
and it's not
And
like
it's
there's a message in there that has some sort of like time limit on it. It's like drink and party and have sex. It's okay.
right. Well, and you've got Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long. Those are, I think would call those hits, right? Those were big singles. Then you've got Hell's Bells and Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, which were also big songs, but maybe not, top 10 singles. So that's right there. You got 4 out of 10 songs that are awesome. Mm-hmm. So now you got 6 other songs that maybe not everybody knows the names of those songs, but they're not filler songs, like maybe they weren't as wildly famous as You Shook Me All Night Long, but they're still great songs that sound a lot like that, and they just didn't get played on the radio.
Right. I would argue if you bought that album because you liked You Shook Me All Night Long, you probably liked the rest of the album.
Absolutely. And here I'm going to throw something else down on you. And I've gotten a lot of crap for this over the years, so it's okay if you want to try to humiliate me right here at the end of our very first episode.
Sure.
The album that came out right after that, the next album they did, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, one of the longest album titles in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the whole thing is the title. There's no parentheses, no comma, I don't think either. I like that album more than Back in Black. I listen to For Those About to Rock more than I listen to Back in Black. And I absolutely love that album.
Now I'm going to have to give that a listen, because I never listened to it, and I never listened. It's like AC/DC stopped making records after Back in Black for some reason for me.
Yeah.
Which is weird, right? Because you'd think, well, you got into them from that album, you must be an AC/DC fan. I would argue I am not. It's weird that I'm saying this. I know how weird this might sound. I'm saying that album matters to me, and words are hard. It matters to music.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I am not an AC/DC fan. I'm an Angus Young fan.
Yeah.
Sure, I get you. But for some reason, like, it didn't make me go, I need to listen to every album in their catalog. I tried. I didn't love them, and I was okay with that. Like, to me, that album is like the crowning jewel. I also recognize I'm an individual and you think differently, but now you're making me want to listen to For Those About to Rock all over again and see what I think of it. Because
I think you should.
Yeah. And I love that song a lot.
Oh, it's so good. And I'll tell you, the 1-2 punch of listening to Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution into For Those About to Rock, like just 2 songs as one album ends and the next one starts. Oh, dude, it's it'll make the hair on your arm stand up. It'll grow hair on your chest. It'll make you remember why you play guitar. Just listening to those 2 songs one after another. Absolutely.
You got now. You've sold me. I got to go listen to that record.
All right. So that's music that matters for this episode. AC/DC's Back in Black. I want to thank everybody for sticking it out to the end of the episode. Don't forget to find us on social media. We're here on the YouTubes, of course. We're also on Twitter and soon to be on Instagram and on Facebook. Different Strings Podcast here with Andrew and Wes. And we appreciate your time and we value it. And we look forward to your comments and ideas for future episodes. And we will be back with episode 2. Andrew, you want to give people a teaser on the topic for episode 2?
All right. Episode 2. We're going to be talking about social media product demos and why you should be wary of them.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be picking the music that matters for that. And I think you will be surprised.